Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the second episode in the Path to Victory series. This time we are going to cover the second most densely populated part of Canada, Southern Quebec and Montreal. Now, I will note of this branch out here, not all of these ridings are being categorized here. Not strictly because they might not be part of Southern Quebec, just they're not similar to the other subregions. I try to keep the subregions broadly similar to each other. For example, we go back to the GTA here. Brampton and Mississauga, for example, the ridings involved in those subregions are broadly similar. But to begin, we have our first subregion, and one last thing to note. Zoom out here. I am now adding block here because in hindsight, I probably should have block here all the time. There are a bunch of ridings here that are not remotely competitive for either the Conservatives or the Liberals. They are solid block ridings unless the block completely collapses, and then it's a bit of a wild card, kind of what happened in 2011 as a specific example. That was a bit of a wild card. They won NDP there, but I don't think I think they could have really won anywhere if you had the right campaign and the right leader. Obviously, Jack Layton hit the stride perfectly there, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be that way. But no need to take much more here. Actually, I will. We'll start with this. Okay, so as before, we have glorious spreadsheet with the riding trend. So the start here, we're going to have Northern Montreal. We'll just do this for a second, just so it doesn't... Oh, well, it did anyways. Well, zoom in here. So, to be clear, when I'm calling... Helps me on the right layer. When I'm calling Northern Montreal, are these ridings. Now, you might not consider them, strictly speaking, Northern Montreal. I'm calling it Northern Montreal because it's broadly north and it's part of Montreal, or at least the island of Montreal. I think it's technically several municipalities. But the reason why these six are grouped together is because they are broadly similar to each other. And we can see just the general trend here. So these ridings are the parts of the island of Montreal where the bloc is the most competitive. Historically, they have averaged about 33% in this area, but it is partially under, or it is trending away from the bloc, even if you ignore 2011 and 2019 as not great youth performance. 2019 and 2021 are very similar to 2011, and 2011 was the worst block performance, I think, on record. So I think this is one of the regions that is trending away from the block. And if you look specifically at the Conservatives, not doing so hot here. This is a very francophone, very urban region. And the Conservatives in general don't do amazing with francophones. They don't do that bad, mind you, but they don't do good in Quebec in general. So Anglophone or Francophone Quebecers is both not great, though they do worse with francophones in general. And they do bad in urban areas, and this is a very urban area. I mean, just look at the density of these ridings. I have to zoom in quite a bit so you can even see them in good detail. Now, conversely, the Liberals have really just been trending upwards other than the blip that is 2008, 2011, and 2006, where they lost and then ran back to back-to-back poor candidates. But since Trudeau, they have been doing better and better. Now, Trudeau is a Montreal local. That probably helps him quite a bit. But the Liberal Party itself has focused more and more on urban areas, whereas I would say under Chrétien, yes, they did quite well in urban areas, Chrétien and Paul Martin, but I don't think that was the focus so much as it is now under Trudeau. If you average these 4 elections with these three have a much higher average. So Northern Montreal here is almost entirely uncompetitive for the Conservatives. It is best shown here. I am considering... I'll just minimize these. These aren't... Actually, no. For once, I want to minimize these. So I am considering the bloc here as a third entity because it's broadly left-wing. It has some right-wing characteristics. Like, it's very left-wing on economics. It's left-wing on things like abortion and climate change and stuff like that. But it's very right-wing on things like immigration, assimilation, issues that are deemed national importance to Quebecers, or Quebec, the Quebecois nation, if you will. So they don't cleanly fit in left-right, and they don't act cleanly left-right. They're much more open to the Conservative Party federally than they are to the Liberals, especially in 2023 here. Because the Conservatives federally are more in favor of decentralization than the Liberals are. So they don't really fit nicely. So I'm excluding them from this naive left-right characterization because they don't fit nicely into it. And when we do that, we actually get broadly reasonable numbers here when we ignore them, which I think does lend credit that they are partially right-wing, partially left-wing in who they are attracting. And that really brings them in line to what other areas of this density you would expect about. It's a bit high at 84-16, left-right split, but very urban areas tend to be like this. And in general, this is a dead area. Though, it's not an entirely dead area for the bloc. I'll just grab some color here. So a lot of this is very core liberal. I'm not going to say the most core liberal, because the bloc can win some of these ridings, but for the most part, this is pretty much core liberal territory here. The only one that is slightly bloc is Point de Ile here. The rest of these are core liberal. I will say, specifically this one here, I can't think of the name of it, NDP are competitive here, but for all intents and purposes for this series, I'm considering the NDP and the Liberals one and the same in regards to path to victory, because in either perspective, the perspective of the Liberals, perspective of the Conservatives, if the NDP has the seat, that's as good as the Liberals having the seat, because those two are more likely to form a coalition to stop the Conservatives than deal with the Conservatives to stop the Liberals, or to stop the NDP. So from the perspective of the Conservative Party, the NDP or the Liberals winning the seat is irrelevant. In the perspective of the Liberals winning the seat is more ideal, but the NDP winning it's not that big of a deal. They're likely to prop up a Liberal minority, as has seen many times in history where the NDP has done exactly that, especially right now. So that's kind of what you get here. It is, I think, a very competitive seat for the NDP and a little bit to the bloc too, but because of the fact that it's very NDP and liberal, I'm going to put it more firmly in the liberal camp, just because if you run this elections enough times, the NDP and liberals should win almost always. Though the bloc can win, and they have won before. So moving on to the next sub-region, we have, just scroll over here, we have downtown Montreal. Wow, shocking. So just to capture what I'm counting as downtown Montreal, and again, you might not consider all of this downtown Montreal, but this is what I am using for classification purposes. It doesn't necessarily perfectly line up with what people normally consider downtown Montreal per se, or what is literally Montreal, because some of these I don't think are actually technically Montreal by municipal boundaries. But what matters here is it's the character of the ridings. All these ridings are broadly fairly competitive for the NDP, at least more so than any other ridings in Quebec, or sorry, any other ridings in Montreal. Very competitive for the NDP. The Bloc and the Conservatives are almost absent from here. Again, you look at these Bloc numbers, Since 2008, they've barely crested 21%. And since Duceppe left, they have barely done... They haven't even hit 20%. They got some 30s and 40s early on, but as the bloc, because again, this thing with the bloc was more left-wing, especially more socially democratic in its early days under Duceppe, and it's now becoming a bit more right-wing socially, though still being left-wing economically. And the other thing that's worth noting too is these early days and these early numbers for the bloc, the NDP and the Greens are both doing quite poorly. That's when you see them doing these best numbers here. And as soon as the NDP and the Greens start getting some strong numbers here, the bloc numbers fade away. By the time they're down here around 16% compared to their high of 40%, the NDP and the bloc together at the NDP and the Greens together at 30% versus about 14%. So you're seeing a lot of this social democratic, urbanite, dare I say, poor vote is moving away from the bloc into parties that are probably actually more better fit to capture the concerns of that population. I would also say it's potentially immigration might be affecting this. These areas are still largely francophone, but they're not as francophone as areas the bloc is currently winning. They're winning almost the entirely francophone ridings, whereas a lot of these ones in Montreal are, for lack of a better word, they're more diverse, I guess. I don't really like using the term in this context, but they have a lot of immigration in them. So it's a very different character profile. And when you're talking about votes for a nationalist party, new immigrants are going to be less willing to vote for that because they're not that nation. They're an immigrant. That's by definition. That's what that is. Now, conversely, the Liberals have always done quite solidly here, except for the mid-2000s, or the late 2000s, early 2010s, with the loss of Paul Martin and Dion and... what's his face? Ignatieff. So these are always going to be the worst times for Liberals because the party got wiped out pretty much here in these 3 consecutive elections. But the key here is before and after they have done quite well. About 43%. They were doing a bit better down here, but again, down here, the NDP and the Greens are weaker, so they're stronger now. So, of course, they're doing better. So, some of these ridings are literally won by the NDP. Rosemont Le Petit Rosemont, or whatever. There's too many ridings in Canada, and the French ones, the names are long and complicated. They're often several parts. They're not like over here where it's like Scarborough East or North or whatever. That's easy. These are not that easy, typically. But the gist here, all of these, for all intents and purposes, are the most core liberal NDP ridings. These ones will almost never go conservative. Again, we go here, we scroll over, we're at 87-13 average. And that includes some of these early years where the Conservatives do really well here and they've been trending away from these numbers. So this 87-13 kind of understates it because the last 3 elections have been close to 90-10. This is some of the parts of the country where the Conservatives do the worst. Francophone, hyper-urban, heavy immigrant population, heavy university educated, like the worst. Oh, wow, very low marriage rate, very low children in home rate for at least non-immigrant populations. So it's one of the areas where the demographics they do the worst with are all here. So it's no surprise that this is core liberal area. This is the demographics the Liberals always do, or not always, are currently doing the best with. Now, I will always stress, which I do all the time, talking about demographics. Demographics, some people argue demographics are destiny. That's dumb. That's ridiculous. demographics go to the party that's offering things that they like. So the fact that these areas, the demographics I just kind of named off here, go heavy liberal is just because liberals offer policies that appeal to these people and the conservatives don't. That's not good or bad. That is healthy and natural. One party can't cater to everybody. And now, to round off Montreal proper, we have Southwest Montreal. So this is the Anglophone portion of Montreal. And interestingly, this is the part of Montreal that the Conservatives are actually gaining ground in. Because if we look here, even with the divided Alliance Reform and PC parties in the early 2000s, the late 90s and early 2000s, they're underperforming what the current Conservative Party is doing. Two separate parties that appealed to both more strongly right-wing people and more centrist people are underperforming one party that is generally more staunchly right-wing. I don't think anyone could reasonably say, since, you can even go back to 2011, since Harper took over the Conservative Party and formed, that the Conservative Party is less conservative than the Progressive Conservative Party. It is more staunchly right-wing in pretty much any metric you want to name. And they're doing better in this region. And notably, the Liberals are trending significantly worse. The Bloc are trending significantly worse in this region. The NDP are trending significantly, or they're doing better. Sorry, they're not trending worse, they're trending better. But even with the NDP trending better, their current performance is only about 11%. Conservatives are getting about 19%, Liberals 56%. So I want to stress here, the Conservatives are doing better in this region, quite surprisingly, because it's a very urban riding, and urbanicity is one of the biggest factors for why people vote, as a causative factor. Because again, a lot of demographic data I have quoted so far, such as immigrant populations, language spoken at home, they are not causative factors, they're correlative factors. Education level may be causative, but not in the way you think about it. Like, it's not the fact that people are educated that makes them liberals or conservative. That's another video, honestly. But urbanization level is causative because urban and rural populations have different concerns. By the status of where they live, it's different. So what's the deal here? Well, the Conservatives are doing better here, but we're still looking at the Liberals getting solid high 50s. You bring it over here, it's a more healthy number. The most recent election even was 76-24, but we're still looking at 80-20, or sorry, 81-19. And split. This is a region that maybe the Conservatives might get some breakthrough in some areas. In fact, I might even color one of these slightly differently just to mark that. But overall, not very likely at all. The most competitive one here is Mount Royal. The rest of these are semi-competitive for the Conservatives. Mount Royal is sort of competitive. Like, they're the second party, and I think 338 currently has them at like 25% to 50% liberal. I'm in a similar ballpark. Let me just pull this up on my other screen here. They have 50% liberal, 27% conservative. And I have very similar numbers in that riding. Oh, I miscolored one of these. The only one that doesn't quite fit here is this guy down here. And I think that's just, I can't quite place it. Maybe I should have included this guy in the downtown region, but whatever. This guy's closer to the downtown region. This guy is the most competitive, Mount Royal. All in all, the Isle of Montreal, it's not the place the Conservatives are competitive in or really can win. Moving on here, we get Laval. What's the deal with Laval? Well, Liberals are trending upwards in Laval, especially if you ignore these 3 years. 3 elections that you should always ignore for the Liberals. The Conservatives are roughly flat. Okay. The NDP are a little better, I guess. The Bloc are losing a lot of ground. So what's the deal here? Well, easy to say. And this is Laval, these 4 regions here, by the way. This is not a competitive region. The Conservatives on paper do good. Do better than this region even. But again, you look at the per riding results. They're flat. They're very smooth. But they're not competitive. This again is very similar to most of these areas. This just isn't competitive at all for the Conservatives. People talk about, myself included sometimes, the Conservatives need to do better in Quebec, but pretty much everything here is not that. These are Southern Quebec and Montreal are not areas the Conservatives are competitive in. Their best bet if they want useful results is the Bloc to actually win some of these ridings. Now, I don't think they should give up on these ridings. You should try to contest them and try to win them, but you shouldn't twist and cater their platform to win them. They should just pitch their platform here. You're probably not going to win, but you might win. And if you don't sell and pitch your ideas somewhere, you can never win. So, overall, I don't think anyone's surprised. Montreal and Laval, not conservative areas. Shocking, right? Yeah. Now we get to one of the more interesting regions. We get the Montargis? I don't know. And that is roughly, should be these ridings, I think. This is actually just the census region in Quebec. I thought about splitting it up, but there really isn't a good way to split this up that like is nice, coherent blocks. Basically, this area down here is the outer suburbs of Quebec, the more Anglophone-ish suburbs. The northern suburbs are more Francophone. These ones are more Anglophone. Again, more in air quotes. These are not very Anglophone. You look overall here, the Liberals do okay. And in fact, this actually kind of underportrays the Liberals because there's some ridings where they actually do very good and some they're competitive in. But really, the story here is the Bloc. So, again, other than the 2 ones you should always ignore for the Bloc, they had really high 40s, low 50s before the bad years, and they're now the low 40s right now, trending slightly upwards. If they continue trending upwards, I don't know, but that's what it is so far. Conservatives flat, NDP small growth, Green's basically relevant here, and the People's Party has pretty much always been irrelevant in the so far. Maybe they won't one day, but they're small fish. They have no real areas of major strength, if that is to make sense. On paper, this is not a competitive area at all for the Conservatives, though I think that is betrayed a bit because the Bloc, I think, here is taking a lot of people who would otherwise vote for the Conservatives. That said, even if the Conservatives are getting all of those Bloc voters, I think we're really just looking more like a Brampton area. Again, this is heavily suburban, effectively. Some of these ones here, out here, are not that suburban, but again, a lot of this is effectively just the outer suburbs of Montreal, possibly going into the exurbs. But, again, not the most competitive area. So we kind of have a couple colorations here I'm going to go. So we're going to go, let's see. So this guy is, wait, that's the wrong color. Sorry about that. It should be this one. This guy here is competitive for the Liberals. They should normally win it, but it's not guaranteed. They need to win it if they want to actually win an election. Any election where they don't win this is not an election they're going to win, pretty much. And then you have a bit safer ones here and here, where they normally will win these ones. Even the Provincial Party does quite well here. And the Provincial Party is doing quite bad in general. Towards the Bloc, though, we kind of have a different perspective. Oh, pardon me. 1 second. Yeah, I return. So this guy, this guy, and this guy are all competitive for the block. They're kind of like point ill. They normally will win this, but not always. Not guaranteed. I forgot one for the Liberals too. Pardon me. This guy here should normally be won by the Liberals. This one, again, is one of those ones that might be closer to Southern Montreal and like actual riding profile. Maybe I should have included that one, but you have to make some arbitrary choice on this because there is actually no reason, like objective reason to categorize any of these otherwise, or in any way, shape, or form. A lot of this is just best judgment. Now these outer ones. So these ones here are more like the suburbs, and these guys that are block light are more francophone, and the other ones are less francophone. And then these dark block ones are more of the outer suburbs, exurbs, getting closer into the core block country, because we look roughly right here and right here is core block area. That's where most of the actual block voters are. And like raw numbers, not even just percentages, but also percentages. These are the ridings they win the most in typically. But again, overall not a very interesting area, because it's just, sorry, it is a very interesting area, but it's a very predictable area. Basically, the areas, the ridings that are the most urban and the most least francophone are the ones Liberals do the best in. In some of these ones that have more anglophones, again, they do better. Then we get to Estrie over here. Again, this is just the census region. Just the census region. And it's this is actually one of the most interesting regions from the perspective of the Conservatives. So they did really good in the 90s when Charest and a couple other strongholds down here. But after they retired, / left federal politics, they did a bit worse. And have since done a bit better. They're still below their peak performance, if you will, but aren't doing too bad. And they have some areas of strength, such as Compton Stanstead here and Brum Mesquite here. Missisquoi? Pronunciation, I don't know. Now, strength is in loose terms. This is strong for Quebec, for the Conservatives. We're talking high teens, low 20s kind of in these regions. So it's conceivable with the right play of cards in the right areas that these could probably be flipped Conservative, though the bloc is definitely eating on the Conservative lunch here, which is causing these to go the way they are. Liberals as a whole, they don't do amazing here. We're talking about the low 30s. Likely a lot of this low 30s is buoyed by the fact that Trudeau is a Quebecer, speaks good French, and is willing to cater to Quebec quite a bit, though I don't think he was willing to cater to Quebec as much as necessary to keep holding this in the long term. I think a good Conservative performance or a very good bloc performance, which again you're seeing here, Blanchette is doing better and better time after time. And we're also seeing the Conservatives do it better here. And again, I want to dispel one of the things here that comes up a lot. It's, again, not very relevant, but the People's Party here, they had a huge growth from 2019 to 2021, 0.6 to 3.2. 3.2 is quite significant. That's better than the Greens. But the Conservatives also gained 2% here. A lot of the gains the People's Party are making are not at the expense of the Conservatives. They're activating a lot of voters who wouldn't vote otherwise. Some places they are at the expense of the Conservatives, but not all of them, and not every place. The People's Party is very much the NDP of the right, albeit much smaller and much newer. The NDP activates a lot of voters that would not vote for the Liberals. If the NDP didn't exist, if you merge the two parties, you wouldn't get the combination of their percentages. You wouldn't be in this region. You wouldn't be not, or 2021 would not have been 44%, give or take. It likely would be much lower. Might even be below 40% because a lot of the NDP voters just won't vote for them. If they wanted the Liberals, they would have voted the Liberals already. But overall, this region, not super competitive, and especially as you project trends going forward, I think you're going to really see it not be competitive. Now, there's some areas that are more, and I think a Conservative majority could contest some of these ridings, but some are not, really. So, just to color this in here, what do we got? So, we have a couple colors. I don't really see at this point in time Sherbrooke ever going Conservative. It might go NDP. Maybe in a long shot it could go Bloc. I don't really see it going Conservative. Compton Stansted and Brum Mesquite are potential pickups for the Conservatives / losses for the Liberals, but not guaranteed. And it would be a bit of a long shot, though I will say, if and when either of these do flip, I think they'll probably flip forever. I don't think they'll be tossing and turning. It'll be like Richmond Arthabaska or Megantique L'Herbe. My French pronunciation is not great, so apologies. A lot of these ridings, once they flip to Conservative, have pretty much stayed Conservative. Now, you could also argue these are the most conservative parts of Quebec provincially, or just in general, sure, but the characteristics are very similar. And then we have one of the most marginal ridings in Canada. Not the most marginal by any means, but very marginal. For lack of better terms, I'm going to give it slight Bloc edge just because they normally win it. But it's a very marginal riding. The Bloc normally wins this, but not always. And the Liberals very easily can win this, and I bet if you redid the 2021 election, they probably would have won it a couple times, if you just do probabilistically. And now, finally here, in case anyone is worried that this was dragging on too long, we're hitting the final region. We have northern Montreal suburbs. So, to capture what I'm calling this, I'm calling it these 5 ridings. Again, you might argue these other 2 should be part of this, but when I look at the demographics of those ridings and I look at the voting history of those ridings, they're different enough to me that I don't think they should be included. Like, the main thing I'm counting in here are places where effectively are relatively suburban compared for Montreal or Laval. Like, you could reasonably call them suburbs, and the Liberals are actually competitive in them. They might be a long shot competitive, but, still conceivable. Whereas you look into Montcalm or Rivière du Nord, you're looking at like almost 30-point margins in some of these, whereas right here, Mirabel is just 16-ish if you look at 338. Very similar numbers for myself, obviously. I think I have it just shy of 20, but then I also have Montcalm above 30. I have the Bloc in a stronger position than 338 has. So, that's the region. If you don't like it, comment below why you don't like it, but the general gist here is this is one of the... It's very urban and very suburby. Suburby? But it's a very Bloc-heavy region. Now, since the Bloc's heydays, they're flat, and the region's voter turnout has increased by about a quarter. So that's not great in terms of vote share, because he went from 60 to 44%, but we're still talking about 44%. Average of 47, once you consider all of the last 30 years. You compare this to the Liberals. They've gained some ground, but not a lot. Conservatives are flat, generally speaking, and the Greens and NDP are up, but again, not really relevant. Most of the growth in this region has really been in the NDP and the Liberals, and that's just an increase in turnout. You look at percentages, yes, their Liberal percentage went up, but that's because, as I just said, they got more of the new turnouts to show up. If you did this in naive left-right, again, not great. you actually look at the raw, it's 39-13, which is not that bad, frankly. It's, again, this is one of those regions where the block makes it very complicated to capture. I suspect if the block didn't exist, this would probably be very similar to York here, which a commenter pointed out, rightly so, that what I call the York region is extremely poor choice because York is actually a region in Ontario and it's over here. So, extremely misleading naming choices, but sorry about that. York here, the actual region of Ontario, I think that's what this would be similar like if the block didn't exist. But we don't live in that timeline. The block exists. So this is very blocky, for lack of better terms. The block should normally win these ridings, and some of these ridings are so core to the block that I can't conceive of a timeline where the party doesn't win them. Rapid. Oh, well, okay, maybe. Yeah, no, I'll do this color. These margins aren't as high as some of the ones that, some of these dark ones like Central Montreal that are giving to the Liberals. But they're so dark because, again, I don't see the block not winning Mirabel if they exist. The party's effectively gonna not exist if it doesn't win it. Because the characteristics of this riding, or Rapintigny, I don't know, my pronunciation's not great, are very similar to these ridings. These ridings. These ones over here. These ones over here. They're very similar in a lot of demographic characteristics. It'd be hard to imagine they lose these two, and they don't basically take massive losses across the entire province and almost basically don't exist. And if we want to consider this as a strictly conservative path to victory here, then we're looking at a situation where the block has to win all these ridings. So all these light-colored ones, these dark-colored ones, some of these ones that are competitive with the Liberals with the block has to win them if the Conservatives want to win a minority government, typically. Maybe in a timeline where the Conservatives are like sweeping much of the suburbs of the GTA, the outer suburbs of the GTA, that they win all these ridings here. Maybe the Liberals can win some of these ridings, or most of them. But if, as I marked here, that a lot of these ridings are only tilt conservative in a scenario where the Conservatives are going to win, I would rephrase this. If they're only nice to haves, like they're not core ridings they must win, they're just these ridings we should be able to win. If they don't sweep all of the should be able to win, then the block needs to sweep all of these. So I'm keeping block, again, as a separate color here because they don't fit nicely into any of the political spectrum, into normal Canadian politics. They are doing their own thing. They are actually, for a left-wing party, very friendly to the Conservatives, or for a mostly left-wing party. They're left-wing, again, the block is complicated. They're left-wing in Canada. I think in Europe they would be a right-wing party. And I don't mean that in the cringy sense that you see Europeans use where they're like, the Democrats are a right-wing party in the Europe. No, that's stupid. Like, politically speaking, the Democrats and the British Labour Party are almost the same party. There's some differences, but they're very, very similar. Yeah, if you look at, like, France, the actual left-wing in France are, like, actual hardcore socialists, and the Democrats in the US are just social democrats, if you want to call them that. Or the Liberals in Canada are maybe flirting with social democrat, though they're not fully social democrat. They're more corporatist. But by no means does that make some of these like Democrats right-wing in European terms. That's silly. No, the Bloc is a right-wing party in European terms, because if you look at what the Tory party in the UK is currently doing, how they're currently acting, They almost one-to-one fit with how the Bloc is currently acting. With the only exception, the Bloc actually does it. The Bloc actually opposes immigration and actually does things to reduce immigration in Quebec, at least their provincial counterpart does. They actually support, like, they actually do the things the British Tory party says it's going to do. At least socially. The exception might be economics, but what the Bloc says they're going to do economically is what the Tory party in the UK does economically, which is being economically left-wing. So, I think for all intents and purposes, the Bloc is a right-wing party in European terms, but they're in Canada, and the political spectrum in Canada is different. What is left-wing in Canada is not left-wing in Europe. They overlap, but they're not the same. What's right-wing in Canada is not what's right-wing in Europe. They overlap, but they're not the same. I hope that makes sense. I might maybe one day do an entire video about the Bloc because they're a complicated, weird party that doesn't fit nicely in Canada, but that is where we are getting off here. So now we have the two most populated regions in the country colored, or densely populated, and we will continue filling out more of this map. If you have any preferences on areas you'd like to see, you could let me know. Prioritizing. I do have a priority list in my head how I'm going to do this. Basically do what I think are the most interesting and or important regions first, and then do the least interesting ones last. Like, sorry guys, but I'm going to do the, like, rural Ontario, like, last. It's not interesting. Rural Ontario is, like, all blue. Or possibly rural prairies might be doing last, because that's literally, like, all blue except a couple ridings that are orange. Like, if that's not very exciting. But, yeah, let me know. Comment below what you thought of the video, what you think, what I should prioritize in this series. If you don't like that I've grouped the NDP and the Liberals together for the purposes of this, if you don't like that I'm breaking the Bloc out, if you think it's confusing when you're talking about the Bloc here, which one ridings are competitive between Bloc and Liberals, or which ones are conservative Liberal. Now, to be fair, there are actually no ones that are just conservative and Liberal. Like, these ones, Bloc, are competitive and to be fair. But if that's confusing, let me know. Otherwise, if you liked the video, by all means, like, share, subscribe, let everyone know. You're the only marketing for the channel. You sharing stuff, I guess, my Twitter, sort of. But if you like the channel, it really does help to share it to your friends, let other people know. It's always appreciated. But otherwise, if you like the video, not that you like the video, sorry. Wow, awkward. I bid you all adieu, and I will see you hopefully next week with a general Canada update, but I am still looking for more polls. Abacus and Nanos are not enough. But, again, I bid you adieu.